Welcome to St. Louis County Library's virtual program, So You Want to Write a Novel, presented by Kim Lozano. Remember, you don't need to have a library card or even be a resident of St. Louis County to attend our programs. If you enjoyed yourself tonight, if you learned something new, please tell your family and friends. Feel free to check out a full list of our upcoming programs at slcl.org/events. In particular, I have a couple things to mention, two kind of larger projects that the library is involved in. One is that next month is National Novel Writing Month, and St. Louis County Library is the host of many of upcoming events related to that. The first being next Thursday, October 27th at 7 p.m., we'll have a virtual kickoff event with the local municipal liaisons from the St. Louis chapter of NaNoWriMo. And so I'll have a link for that registration as well as the other things I mentioned here in the chat when we get underway. But I want to mention too that in November, the library and our branches at Grand Glaze, Grants View, Mid-County, Oak Bend, and Saks will be hosting a variety of writing opportunities with National Novel Writing Month. And also our reference and computer lab training departments are offering classes to support your writing this coming month and beyond. We also have a trainer from Pressbooks, a self-publishing service that's available for free to library card holders who will be giving a presentation on November 3rd at 2 p.m. And you can register for any of those or browse those opportunities in the link that I'll share here in a moment. The other big thing that we're working on at the library is we're wrapping up our first year of hosting the St. Louis Storytelling Festival. It's the 43rd annual Storytelling Festival this year, and we are wrapping up tomorrow night with a storytelling showcase at Grants View. So we've had a week of events and programs, I think up to 25, and this is one of them, as we explore different kinds of storytelling in the second week of the festival. So I'm glad you're joining us. But you can find out more about tomorrow evening's showcase with regional storytellers through the link I'll share as well. As I mentioned, our programs, many of our programs are recorded and posted to the library's YouTube channel, and you can find those through the St. Louis County Library link in a moment as well. Lots of links, sorry, but I guess it's like the librarian's way to make sure you have all the information at your fingertips. And so we'll also have a virtual sign-in sheet too that we love to hear what you think of tonight's program. That helps us with future programs too. So I'll have the link for that too. All right, so now to our content for the evening. I'm so excited to have Kim with us. Let me turn things over to Kim Lozano. She is a developmental editor, a writing coach, and workshop leader. Her own creative work has been published in the Iowa Review, North American Review, Denver Quarterly, Alaska Quarterly Review, and many other journals and publications. She also writes on the craft of writing, and she's a monthly contributor for Scribbler, a book subscription box company. So she was going to tell us more about her endeavors as things kick off here. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Gonna do a screen share. There we go. And how do we look, Sarah?
Yep, it looks great.
Okay.
Success.
Okay. Okay. Well, hi, everybody. I'm glad you could join to talk about writing on a Thursday night. That right there means you're one of my favorite kind of people. And I would like to introduce myself a little more real quick. Sarah kind of went over it. Actually, first, I want to tell you what's on my mind. I seem to be wearing the same poncho that I'm wearing in my bio author, my little photo there. And I just want to say that I think it's my brand. I think this is branding, brown sweater poncho. So I'm not sorry. Not sorry, I accidentally wore the same thing, and I'm going to go with it. So I am Kim Lozano. I am a creative writing workshop leader. I teach classes in St. Louis, and I also teach private classes, sometimes online. I was on an editorial team at a literary magazine for about 6 years. So besides going through thousands of pieces of writing helping other writers. I also helped curate probably tens of thousands of pieces of writing, doing that job. I serve as a frequent contest judge. So the most recent contest I worked on was the Women's Fiction Writers Association, their Rising Star Novel Award. And I'm a developmental editor and writing coach. So I work with private clients to get their books ready for publication. Sometimes I just work with them on coaching. They need just want some help with their writing. Maybe they want some deadlines. Maybe they're working on short pieces, wanting to submit those to literary magazines. And I help people with that. And I am also a writer myself. So the things that I'm going to talk to you about tonight are things I care about because I have to apply them to in my own work. So before I hit that slide real quick, the other thing I'm going to say is that I'm reading off a paper a little bit. I kind of hate to do it, but I'm just going to tell you that I'm doing it. I wanted to use my notes on my thing. And so part of my brand too is just being awkward. So I'm just going to read off my paper and read off the slides, and it's fine. Totally fine. Okay, so I'm putting up this resource page right up front. I was going to put it at the end, and this is a ways you can get in touch with me if you would like to at some point after this presentation. But I'm no dummy, and I know maybe not everybody's going to make it to the end. It's like I'm putting this up front. So if you want to screenshot that for any reason, especially if you'd like to have my email address, emails are welcome. I enjoy talking with writers, and if you just even sometimes want to bounce something off me, I'm really open to doing that. I like hearing from writers. So you can contact me there. There's a link to my website. I've got a lot of writing craft articles on the website. Another resource I have on the website, and that might really apply to some of you if you're new writers in here, is I have a big list of recommended writing craft books. I've read tons and tons and tons, and I've chosen some of my favorites and put them on a list for people. So that might be very valuable to some of you. And the other thing that I really like doing is two times a month I send out a little e-publication. It's totally free. And it's like a little kind of digest where I put in maybe writing coaching, revision tips, maybe writing prompts. I do try to keep an eye out for good calls for submissions. So if you're someone who's wanting to submit to journals, I keep an eye on things that are upcoming. So I just try to make it really of value to writers. That is also on my website. You can sign up for that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about you. If you fall into any of these categories, then great, I'm talking to you. So you might be a novel hobbyist. You just want to have some fun writing and get better at it. Great. I've got some ideas for you. Some people want to their goal is to write a book. It's a bucket list item for themselves. Maybe they're writing kind of a legacy project. I have clients who we work on memoir. Maybe they're trying to leave stories for their family. But if your novel is just a personal project, great. I want to help you make it better. If you're looking to self-publish your novel, you were born at exactly the right time. This is the time in history when that is available to you. And there are so many resources, like Sarah even mentioned, a resource that the library has for people wanting to self-publish novels. Tons of resources for that. Totally a possibility. And then some of you I know have ambitions to have a traditionally published novel. And that would mean if you're trying to go, maybe some of the smaller publishers accept submissions directly, but if you're going for a big publisher, then the bar is very high. It's tough, but books are sold every day. Yours could be one of them. You have to actually get an agent and then have them, pitch that to editors at publishing houses for you. But if any of those people are you, that's probably maybe all of you, then great. I'm so glad that you're here. So the three kind of things I wanted to go over tonight, I kind of think of these as the three energy buckets that your energy is going to go into when you're writing a novel. One of them is the content, and that's the bigger thing I'm going to talk to you about tonight. Commitment, and that is the thing I'm going to touch on the least, and it's probably the most important, but we'll get to the heart of that and why that is actually what is going to matter, and getting a novel written, and then talk a little bit about craft. There is no formula for getting a novel written. There are lots of paths to doing it. So I kind of want to talk about some of the ways that I think maybe work a little better than others, See if I can give you just a little bit of insider help to get you going or to get you restarted. So um, I was at a writing conference recently, and I was sitting around a table, and I over with a lot of writers. So everybody was trying to write novels. Some people had had novels published, some had had them picked up by agents, but one of the writers said this, that books are sold on premise. And we talked about that a little bit. People were really nodding their heads when she said that. And it's not entirely true that books are sold on premise. There's a lot of things that matter. But I think the point was that you have to have a great idea if you want an agent to get interested in your book. And so that's kind of your first hurdle. So, what is the premise? What's the idea in your book? So, your premise can clearly be conveyed in one or two sentences. The idea should be unique, intriguing, and have some commercial appeal, meaning people will want to read it. Okay, so that's kind of basic. And if you know the word premise is a little bit of a term of art, so we could actually have an hour-long workshop on how to come up with and write a premise. But I'm using it in a little more general way here. If you just want to think of it kind of as your big idea, that's fine. So we need to think about what kinds of things go into your premise. Okay, couple of elements. First one being character. So you need a main character. You might be writing a book that has several main characters. You might be writing a multi-point of view book, but your main, I'm just going to streamline it as if you have one main character. Your main character needs a backstory, and that backstory needs to provide a significant wound, a vulnerability, or a need that directly ties to the main conflict of your story. So, you know, a book is made up of a plot, things that happen, kind of this external journey. And then it's made up of the second line, which is your character's internal journey. So if your character, and if the plot over the course of time is going to cause your character to go through changes, you need to know where they're starting from. So this backstory may or may not make it into the book, but you need to know it because it's gonna set up the whole book for you. So we start with that, and then you need some conflict. There must be sufficient stakes, and there must be something to win or lose. So your conflict needs to be about a problem that's difficult to solve for your character, and it has to contain conflict. And that conflict can be with other people, it can be with groups, it can be with institutions, it might be with nature, but the conflict cannot just be internal. So the conflict can't just be an emotionally conflicted character. That'll be part of it, but you have to have some kind of real world conflict. Things need to happen. And so as you're just doing this very basic thinking about your idea, it's never too soon to start thinking, how can I give my character a bigger problem? Sometimes we can start out a little small, or it feels kind of big, but actually it could be pushed to something bigger. I encourage you to do that early on with your idea. So you have character, you have conflict, and now what? So how do you turn that into a story? Do you start outlining some scenes, or maybe you working on your plot? Well, no, because there is something that rules plot. There's something more important than plot, a place that plot comes from, and that is character. So I'm repeating the slide I just had, but it's because we need to talk a little bit about character. Character is, you have some characters, and what I usually have people do is kind of get their cast, a beginning cast together, and start kind of going back and forth. What are some conflicts that could happen between these people? That's where your character is going to come from. If you start with plot and you just start kind of plotting out things that happen, this can happen, this can happen, this can. The problem is then you got to plug these characters into these things you've already decided, and it's not going to feel right, and the story really isn't going to work. So your plot has to come out of character. So here's what Lee Child says. He says there are probably fewer than 6 books every century remembered specifically for their plots. People remember characters. Is that an overstatement? Maybe. We writer types have strong ideas, and we like to sort of put them out there emphatically. But I think that that is a little true. Like, you can have a great idea for a plot. So let's say you're going to write a book about a group of old friends that knocks over a casino. Well, that's been done. That's Ocean's 11. But think about that story. That the things that happen there, it's a lot of big event in that book. But the things that happen really do rise out of characters. There's character drama that's happening, and that informs the plot. So you have to create some compelling characters. So how do you do that? Well, you could go right now and Google character development worksheets or something. There's tons of that. Probably, maybe if you have some writing craft books, they have those. A lot of those I tend to not like. I think a lot of times they want you spending too much time on very irrelevant things. So of course they'll have you say, what does your character look like? And when were they born? And all these things, fine, you need that. But when you start having to come up with what's your character's favorite color and what's their favorite holiday and how do they take their coffee, it doesn't matter. Okay, that kind of stuff doesn't really matter. You can add that in later. So what matters with character? All right, to create compelling characters, they need a past. So you need to think about what in their life has brought them to the point they're now the star of your novel. So what happened to them and how has it affected them emotionally? So you need to give them a past. It may or may not make it into the book. Some of it probably kind of will, but they need to be emotionally prepped for what's going to happen. And the other thing, and that's going to set them up for their internal struggle. And then the other thing you need to know is, what do they value? What kind of a person are they? So sometimes people like to, have their characters take an Enneagram personality test. If you don't know what the Enneagram is, you can Google that. Like, it's a personality test. It's really fascinating, actually. Do it on yourself. But those can be great. Some people use Myers-Briggs test. You don't have to do this, but the point is, what does your character want out of life? What are their values? Do they want excitement? Do they want safety? Do they want predictability? What are they afraid of? So, if you have a character that really clings to safety, that you're going to put them in a high risk situation, right? If your character loves excitement, you're going to make them pay for that. So the point is that you're going to challenge them. You're going to challenge their most deeply held values. What are they afraid of? And then you're going to give them that. Okay. So you've got a couple characters, you've got a premise, and now you're kind of feeling the itch to get moving, right, on your story. So now what? Well, I almost didn't want to do this, but I decided we're going to talk about a couple of terms. I don't really love these terms. I don't really use these terms much, but if you're in the writing world already, there are words you hear all the time, and you've probably, had to talk about them. So there's a couple of ways that we talk about the way books get written in the writing world. One is plotting and one is pantsing. So a plotter is someone who outlines a book before they write it. A pantser is someone who does not outline a book before they write it. Those are kind of crude categories, but pants are flying by the seat of your pants. So really the choice is here, how much planning are you going to do? Some people need to write very extensive outlines. They know everything that's going to happen. I think, what's his name? Amor Towles, is that who wrote A Gentleman in Moscow? I think he outlined that book meticulously, maybe spent a year outlining it before he wrote it. Other writers would never do that. They don't want to do that. So there are pros and cons. I really think you need to think about your own approach and don't just put on somebody else's approach. There are pros and cons to both of these ways. They both have advantages and weaknesses, and I think you need to think about them before you get going. So here are some of the pros to plotting, some big pros to doing this. It's a huge antidote to writer's block. If you've written an outline, then you kind of have an idea what's happening next. So you have something to work off of. Writing an outline can help you to avoid plot holes. So you've kind of worked things through, you can kind of look at that outline, see where you might have something missing, something's not quite leading from something to another. And you can think through these elements of your story without having to actually write them. So it's almost like, it almost can be like a first draft, depending on how extensive your outline is. But um, you'll have this roadmap that you can follow. And the other thing, the real advantage is it can save you a lot of time in revision. So if you know what you're wanting to execute on, and you can pretty much execute on that, then you'll have less potentially, and you'll still have a lot of redrafting and revision, but you'll probably have less than if you didn't. And the other thing I really like about people, I think that people who outline, it can give you confidence in your story. You can feel like you know it. You feel like you know where it's going. It makes you excited to sit down and write it. But there are some cons to plotting. So one thing is kind of what we talked about when I mentioned that if you plot and then just plug your characters in, it can feel like maybe the things happening aren't really arising from the character, like it's not the natural progression of things. So if you plot, you might not know your characters well enough to be prescribing actions for them to take. Another thing that is a real pitfall of plotting, and this is something everybody, once you even write scenes, this is a kind of a test you should do. You can fall into a scene, this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. You have this and. And if it's an and, like beads on a chain that you just put on, you're in trouble, because that is not going to feel like enough cause and effect. So what you need to do instead is between every scene, you should be able to write, this happened, but then this happened, or this happened, therefore this happened. So you have this, the scene affects the next scene, rather than it being sort of, then be kind of independent things. You can work that out in an outline, but you need to be really aware of that. And then some of the reasons that people don't like to outline is because they feel like there's less of a process of discovery as they go along. And you may feel like, oh, I figured it out. Maybe the air is kind of going out of, the wind's going out of my sails a little bit. So that's something to be aware of plotting. So if you want to not do the outline and just, kind of jump into writing, for some people, it's just more fun. It feels like a process of discovery for them. They're kind of, things feel like they're being revealed to them as it goes along. And some people really enjoy that as a process. The story potentially could develop more spontaneously and organically, kind of let your characters go idea, and see how they bump around and what they do and the decisions they make. Another actually, practical advantage is that you can get started writing without having to spend all that upfront time outlining. Like I said, some people have spent a year outlining. You don't have to spend that much time, but people will spend weeks, a month, I don't know, more, getting things outlined. And some people just want to get going in it. So the cons of pantsing, though, are because you do not have a plan, there can be a potential to meander. So, books that are going to sell, that are going to end up on the shelf of Barnes and Noble, should be tight little machines. So your first draft, if you're not outlining, it might be a little bit wandery. If you do not know where your story is headed, it can kind of lack urgency and drive, because you're writing a scene, but you don't have that inside knowledge of how to project forward and what you're kind of working toward, the groundwork that you're laying. So it could kind of suffer a little bit at that level. This is just the first draft, though. You're going to do many more drafts. It can be fixed. But I'm just saying that's kind of an issue with first drafts. And you write yourself into a corner and have to rewrite a significant portion of your book. If you feel like, oh, I've written over to here, and then all of a sudden, ooh, I really want to be over here. Somehow you got to get over there, and that could be time consuming. And probably I would say probably if you do not outline, you're going to have some more editing to do to tighten your narrative than if you had maybe planned it out. But there's some definite pros to going this way, and it could be the thing for you. So my take, people ask me, what do you do? What do you think people should do? And I don't really think it matters if it's working for you. I have friends and clients and people who have done it all different ways. I recommend you take a shot what you think is going to work best for you. Um, if I had to choose for you, if you have no idea, I would say lean into outlining. So probably, I think people who outline in general, the non-outliners are not going to like this, but in general, I think you have a better chance of success with an outline, of getting it done. So the first hurdle is just simply to get a draft done, right? So if that's something that will help you, I'd say do it. Um, I would say the most, well, here's the most important thing. The most important thing is to keep going so that you have something to work with. It doesn't matter how you get it done, um, but you have to have something to work with. So I'm I have a terrible tendency to be a dabbler, shiny object syndrome. So I want to try one way, and then I read something from a writer about the approach they took, and I think, well, maybe I should be doing that. And then I'll read another craft book, and I'm like, oh, this approach is great. This can really be the death of your energy to keep going. I really think just pick something. It doesn't matter. If you don't know anything to, so for instance, I wrote down Lisa Cron's Story Genius. Story Genius. It's a great book. If you read that book and follow it, it will get you and do it. It'll get you a done draft. Okay. If you look at Matt Bell's Refuse to Be Done, and both these books are on my craft book resource, but that book completely different from Lisa Cron's book. But if you follow that book, that will help you get it done. So whatever you need to do is basically what I'm saying is to get that draft written, because that's going to be the hardest thing. Most people who try to write a novels never finish a draft. So that is by far your biggest problem, is getting it done. So, and if something just doesn't work for you, then try something else. But here's a suggestion I have for you. I kind of like this hybrid approach. I recommend it to people if they're not sure what to do. I like a little bit of light planning. So getting some characters going, brainstorm some conflicts, sketch out maybe 4 to 5 major plot points. Think about, if you could think about where the book is heading, like at this climactic moment, if you could think of that, and maybe a possible ending. All of this is provisional, right? This is just, don't get hung up on commitment. I've committed to it, or being paralyzed in our decision making is a real danger for novelists. So start with a little bit of a light plan. I like to do that, and then I like to have people try to write chapter 1. Just give it a shot, because it's 50-50 chance that this is even the place you're going to end up starting the book. Maybe this chapter doesn't even make it into the book, but I like getting going on chapter 1 and then maybe chapter 2. And what you're really trying to do is get a feel for the tone of your book, the voice. We're going to talk a little bit more about voice. That's just like right up there. Books are sold on premise, they're sold on voice. So get writing a little bit, and then see where it's heading. How are you liking the characters? And then assess. So after you've done that much, I think there's some questions you can ask yourself. Do you need some more characters? That's when you're going to start getting ideas for new people who could add drama to the narrative. What new conflicts can you add? Some ideas might be coming up about that. You really need to not skip over assessing whether you've chosen the right point of view character to be telling this story. Sometimes you'll get going in a story with one character and you'll think, this other character over here is kind of becoming more interesting to me. And maybe their perspective on what's happening, maybe I was going to write from the husband's perspective, but maybe it's the wife's perspective. When really let yourself question that early on. Do you want to add another point of view character? So if you were thinking single point of view, would your narrative be enhanced with a second point of view? I don't think this is something that should be decided on because it's a fad, or multi-point of view novels are very popular right now, or anything like that. But what can be great about another character is that those characters can keep secrets from one another, which is really fun for a reader to be in on it and the characters are not. Get a completely different point of view. You can, there's just a lot of potential. However, when you add another point of view, you're cutting the time each character gets in half. So remember that. And so can be a big loss, or maybe not. I think you need to assess early on the perspective you're writing from. So if you're thinking you're going to write a first person, from the, the I perspective of that main character. Um, Stop and think about it after you've written a little bit. And do you like it? Do you like the feel of it? Same as if you were writing in third person, because those are really different perspectives and they're not arbitrary. It's not like if you're a batter going up to bat and you ask the coach, should I go for a homer or bunt? And then the coach just said, whatever, do what you want. Like, no, there's everything has, a reason, there's a strategy. So first person can be very limiting. It is limiting. It's one perspective. It's very subjective. It can be a little claustrophobic, and those can be actually some of the great things that first person brings, but it lacks the perspective of third person and the ability of the narrator to kind of move close and move far away. So what you need to decide what you want and what lends itself to your book. And then at this point, you can start expanding your outline a little bit, adding to it a little bit. And so giving you a little bit more direction on where to go. So let me see if I put this up here. Here we go. Oh, there we go. So I did want to address those of you who might be kind of into writing your novel, done this, you're past where I'm talking about, and you're not sure if your idea is big enough. You're like, I don't know if this is enough, if it's going more. So here's what I might recommend, a couple things for you to do. One thing you could do is a stakes escalation assessment. So ask yourself, what's at stake? And what would happen if my character lost what's at stake? That question should be pretty devastating for your character. If it's not pretty devastating for your character, then your stakes probably aren't big enough. They're not going to succeed at that level, and your reader is not going to be interested enough. And so then have you infused what's at stake with enough value? And sometimes what can happen is that it can feel like stakes like in the real world, but that doesn't mean that it's going to feel like high stakes for your reader. For example, like issues of life and death. Let's think about death. That's big stakes, right? Not really. Not if your reader doesn't really care. So you have to ask, have I infused what's at stake with enough value? Do my readers connect with these people so that if this is lost, they're going to feel it? Because we kind of feel things. That's what readers, we kind of like to live vicariously through the characters. So we need to be able to identify with them and feel what they feel. So if you haven't done that work, then the readers aren't going to care enough. So let's talk a minute about the characters and how to examine your characters. So there are so if you're feeling a little stalled, here's a question I don't think maybe is asked enough, but I find it to be a pretty transformative sometimes. So are there two characters that you can combine into one? Sometimes if the narrative feels a little bit thin or it's kind of diffused a little bit, you might have too many characters. And it could be that if you just would take two characters, like, does this character need to have two brothers? Could she have one brother? And wrap the things in it that you want. Sometimes that can really strengthen it. Ask if your reader needs to care more about your character. And that's just not default. You can't just write it and they'll care. Build it and they'll come, right? You can't just write it and they'll care. You've made a contract with your reader that you're going to make them care about the character. So be able to articulate how you've done that. And then, this is a good time to assess if you have an outline or if you don't. Can I do something else right now? Can I do something out of left field? Can I add some kind of twist that I wasn't expecting, but that would really ramp things up? So I love this quote. This might help you. Okay. Drastic measures. If you need drastic measures, Donald Moss says, ask yourself, who is the one ally your protagonist cannot afford to lose? Kill that character. What is your protagonist's greatest physical asset? Take it away. What is the one article of faith that for your protagonist is sacred? Undermine it. How much time does your protagonist have to solve his main problem? Shorten it. Okay, so those are the ways that you can add more drama, more urgency, and raise the stakes. Everybody probably needs to think about all of that in their book, but especially if you're feeling a little bit stalled out. So we need to talk just a little bit about commitment. This is by far, I think, going to be your biggest problem is getting it written. It is a lot. It's a big, big commitment. A novel could take you 6 months to write, or it could take you 10 years to write. And I know some people think they needed that 10 years, but a lot of times you do not need that 10 years. um, so Jerry Cleaver says that the difference between writers who write novels quickly and those who take years and years isn't how much time they spend writing, but how much time they waste trying to write. Ooh, that hurts me. Yes, I feel that. I feel judged, but it's very true. And people who get novels done do it. They just do it. So, it's a little bit like, people who get gym memberships in January aren't doing it by March. We don't make it a habit. But let me give you a stat that should encourage you. All right, here's the math. If you wrote 250 words a day, for 365 days, you would have 91,250 words. 250 words a day, that's a page. That's very little. You got a year, you don't have to write every day. You could write a little more on other days. An average novel, 80,000 words. So if you're writing a big epic fantasy or something, it's going to be more. But look what you can get done with the little daily practice, a little daily habit, couple times a week habit, up your work kind of a little bit. So the biggest thing though in this is that you need to plan your writing time. You got to plan it. It's really like eating healthy or going to the gym. You got to plan. So put it on your calendar. And like I said, you don't have to write every day. If you get really stressed out about that, you don't have to write every day, but you do need to plan for it. So get it on your calendar. I have a little thing that I do that I think of as my Sunday hour. So the Sunday hour is I sit down for an hour on a Sunday, and then I figure out, what are we eating that week? What do my dinner times look like? What nights can I cook? What nights can I figure out what we're eating? I figure out what groceries I need that I'll go get. And then I look at our appointments. I look at my meetings. I look at my work schedule. And then I decide, based on that, when am I going to write? And I get it on the calendar. Some people are early morning writers. They get up every morning at 4. That's not me. But you do what you need to do, but you got to plan it. And the other thing I love, and I think Sarah mentioned during Nano in November, that they've got some kind of writing dates, like she called them something else. She'll have to remind us. But I love the idea, and I do this myself. I have writing dates where I get on Zoom with other writers, and it's not social. We barely say hello. We say what we're writing, and then we turn off our cameras, mute, and we write for an hour, hour and a half, whatever. And then we come back on and we say goodbye. But knowing you have that, knowing people are expecting you to show up, it's nice to see other faces, and then it's just work time. Those work really well for me. If you want to know some, email me. I know that the London Writers Salon offers writing dates across time zones. So you'll find something that works for you. The Women's Fiction Writers Association has writing dates. I know there are a couple of others that I can't think of off the top of my head, but I think those are super valuable to helping you have that accountability to get your writing done. Quickly, craft. I am a writing craft book junkie, and I love the craft of writing. I love to read good writing and then think about, how did that happen? I love to reverse engineer. How was that sentence made? How is that dialogue working so well? I love the craft of writing. And I think you need to be studying writing craft. I think that if you want to write a good book, we all need to keep getting better. But the problem, so it can be a danger to your actual writing though. So what I like to think of is having these parallel spaces where I write over here, and then I encourage people to be studying craft over here. Don't worry too much about applying that craft as you're drafting. Some of it will naturally get applied because it's just going to stick in your brain, but don't let it slow you down. But it's kind of a lifetime of learning, and it accumulates, and you kind of read, you kind of pick things up by osmosis. So here's my wisdom for you. I think, yes, we should always be learning, but when you're drafting a novel, you're trying to encourage its very existence. You're trying to coax its shy self into the world. The last thing it needs is a bunch of judgment. That will come later. So yes, be learning, but also be really free and open with yourself when you're drafting. Let it get out on the page, celebrate it coming out onto the page. Just that alone, you're getting ahead of everybody else if you're just getting it down onto the page. And then you can do something with that later. You could draft, but it really needs an open, non-judgmental space to come into the world. But I do have some craft kind of to-dos for you. So I do encourage people to read craft books. If you get sick of them, then quit. But sometimes there's a learning curve. There really are kind of principles, the way writing works. If you don't know them, an agent's going to know that you don't know them. So it'll be apparent. So there are things that you need to learn about writing. So I would recommend reading some craft books as works for you. Maybe if you're a bath person, put it by your bathtub and read a chapter at night or something. I really encourage people, if they've never taken writing classes, to take one for a couple of reasons. The least of which is just what you're going to learn from an instructor. But that's valuable too. But you're going to get feedback on your work. I don't know, you didn't really think about whether or not you want to take your in-draft novel chapters into a writing class. It's a little bit of a tender baby, when you're first doing it. So you might want to protect it a little bit, protect your ideas, let it kind of percolate. But there might be other things you could be working on. It doesn't hurt if you're going to go for a traditional publishing contract. I really recommend you try to get some smaller publications under your belt, maybe submit to some literary journals, try to get some acceptances. It does look good. It's just kind of outside validation that, oh, this person can write. Other people have kind of vetted, this, and you don't have to have that at all, but hey, it can help. So, so you'll get some feedback, that'd be good. But what I love, and also it helps you really got to develop a thick skin in writing. You got to be able to take reader feedback and just think about it, not emotionally, but okay, how can that help the work? How can that help the work? And kind of shake off the insecurity and the defensiveness that sometimes we have when we first start sharing our work with people. Really, you got to pass through that phase. So writing classes can help you pass more quickly. I think the very best thing about a writing class that has a critique element is that you are going to have to give feedback to others. Now, this is not an altruistic thing. It is, but that's not why I think it's great. Why I think it's great is that you have to look at someone else's work, figure out what's working, and articulate why. You have to tell them, why is this working? That is such a good exercise for you to start figuring out, why is this working? And also okay, this doesn't feel like it's working, but why is it not working? And you have to articulate that back to another writer. That is like really hardcore workouts for your own development. So I love writing classes. Read good books. Obviously, we're readers, but try to read work that's maybe better than what you can write. So push yourself to be, taking in really great writing. And then the one thing I do want to say about writing craft is that I do love the idea of really working over that first chapter over and over and over. That's a good place to go ahead and try and incorporate what you're learning for a couple of reasons. The most important thing actually is that you're trying to figure out your approach to this book. You need to know what's the tone of this book, what's the voice, and you kind of get that by writing it and writing it and writing it. And so, and that getting that first chapter till it finally really sings, like that's it. I've nailed it. I've nailed the voice. I got the character. I got the psychology. I'm in their head. And sometimes it takes kind of writing and rewriting that first chapter to get there. So I like the idea of kind of doing that, even if that doesn't stay your first chapter, but eventually your first pages are just so important, and they're what is going to get an agent interested. So those first pages have to be extremely great when you end up sending it out. And the first pages are what is going to have an agent say, hey, send me more of that. I'm going to read it. And this is the last thing I'm going to say about, I think before we open this up to Q&A, because this is just making me think about first pages. When you get to the point that you're thinking, I maybe want some professional help on this. I know that getting a full developmental edit of an entire novel can be outside of the budget for some people. It's a hefty tag item. And a developmental edit is going to cover your whole book and page by page by page by page, and you'll just get comments on it. It's a whole entire edit for content of what's happening in your book. Um, One thing you might consider would be to, if you shopped around for editors, trying to get an edit on your first 25 pages. A lot of times an editor can look at those and diagnose things that are going to be happening they can find problems that are probably book wide for you. So investing those first 25 pages can be really smart. And also then they're usually going to want to know what's the whole book about, get a synopsis or something. You have an opportunity to kind of talk about how the first pages kind of go with what you're thinking. So there's a lot of bang for your buck, I think, if you just even get your first 25 pages edited. And then what some people do too later is if they feel like a developmental edit is just they can't swing that, but a lot of editors will do what is called a manuscript evaluation. So they'll read your whole book, but they won't make comments on every single page, and you'll just get general feedback on the whole thing. Like if you just want some professional help, and that's usually a much less expensive item. So I was just thinking about that as talking about first pages, and just as an editor, what I might recommend you might want to do as your if you're shopping around for that. So I think that I am going to stop it right there, and I guess I need to stop my share and then see if Sarah, if there's
Yes.
any questions.
So, so far we have had thank you for a very informative presentation. I know it's tricky when we have library programs to fit, big topics like this into an hour, but you did
Right.
an excellent job. Thank you so much. And so I shared a few of the resources, like the Matt Bell book and some of the other writing uh, excerpts you mentioned. I pulled up links to those books so folks can dig in with those if they want to, and they can contact you on the website to get the whole list of craft books. And there are so many of them. So thank you for doing the heavy lifting there and saving us some time on sifting through them. So we had some questions about well, here's a question for a first-time writer about first-time writers. Do you recommend that those who are getting started that they maybe start with a shorter form like short stories before they tackle a novel, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's a really great idea, I think. It's a smaller container, it's a little less of a commitment. Yeah, I kind of do, like if you're just starting out, you don't have to. And if you got that novel burning in you, then you just got to do it. But I kind of think that's a great idea if you're on the fence, like I could write short stories, like we'll try that out, because a lot of the writing principles will still apply. Novel's a completely different type of structure and beast, but a lot of the writing principles are the same. So you'll learn a ton by getting like short stories critique, especially if you can go to a writing workshop where you're all sharing short stories. Man, that's a great environment. So I do think that's actually a really good idea.
Excellent. And so also along those lines, well, another kind of beginning question, which I love these kinds of questions because they're really helpful to kind of orient everyone. Someone asked, could we talk about what we mean by a craft book when we reference those?
Yeah. So I actually think if you were at the bookstore, you would find sort of there's like usually a writing resource section. And you'll find kind of a whole section of books about creative writing. So different than academic writing, different than journalism. Narrative journalism crosses a little bit. Let's not worry about that. So short stories, novels. There'll be books on. I think I have some just sitting over on writing well, or story structure, or things like that. Just anything that pertains to how to write creative writing pieces. Then they have a shelf at the bookstore. Actually, it's like a thing, like a genre.
My favorite place to visit I think it probably should have been my clue that I wanted to be a writer. When as a teenager, I was spending time in the 808 to 811 section of the library and checking out the writing reference section of Barnes and Noble and other bookstores. It's a
Yeah,
fun place to
right.
be.
Yeah. Writing nerds unite. Yeah.
Yes. Before we get into some of like kind of the more businessy kinds of questions about novel writing that are coming in, I want to. There were a couple specific about kind of craft things, and one was, how do you kind of figure out how many characters there should be in a novel? So they gave an example: two main characters with one or two supporting characters, or multiple characters with an either like four to six with an interweaving storyline. How do we figure that out?
Ooh, right, right. So I would say, so anything I say, you'll find the book that's the exception. So if I say four characters is not enough, you say, oh, but did you read this book as like one character, who's alone in a room for 300 pages? Like, okay, that book exists. But probably, so the characters will bring in the conflict. So the terrible writing answer that you always get, how many pages should it be, is whatever it takes to get your book done. That's the most aggravating answer. It's kind of true. You might have to play with it a little bit. I would say getting up to a cast of 12 is kind of big. But then I can start naming books that have that. So it's ambitious, right? The more characters you add, it gets more complicated. So how much can you do? And uh, so 6 to 10 characters, one main character, one or two main characters, ballpark. That's totally ballpark. I would say when you're reading a book, I keep sticky notes in the front of my book. I write about books a lot though, too. So I need to kind of be thinking, what's this book doing great? But I'll keep a sticky note in front of a book and I'll write, ooh, this has, I know this past year, I had a book club and we read The Hive with Melissa Scholes Young. It had 5 points of view. Every chapter it had 5 main characters. And you say, well, that's how that's done. So I would question it later as you start writing it. If it feels a little flat, like, why is this character here? So question your characters. Do they need to exist? And if they don't, cut them. It's a little bit of trial and error. There's my very imprecise response to that.
It's an unwieldy question when we start talking about specifics. So I think you handle that expertly, of course. But I think, yeah, paying attention to what we're seeing in other books. I think that's really the key, right? Is to like read, to be reading, and then helps you to develop your.
Make notes and steal ideas, right? Like, or model things. I have books up here, some of my favorite books, and I almost use them as little guides, so I'll pull something off this shelf when, like, ooh, I'm going to see how Jess Walters handles describing rooms. Like, I need to describe a room. Yeah, I need to describe a room. How does he? I'm sure he has a room in here, and I'll find it. I literally do that. They're my mentors. The authors, other authors are your mentors. Their books are your teachers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, shout out Jess Walters. There was another question about pros and cons between setting your story in a real place versus a fictional location. Like, quick, again, kind of
Yeah.
a big question,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. So pros and cons to that. So a real place can kind of be cool, especially if it's a place so you can already have a lot there for you. It's just there and you can just use it, mine it. A fictional place, you have to create it. So there's some more work there, right? You have to create a very believable fictional place. One good thing about writing fictional places, or maybe kind of basing it on something, is that you're not tied to that. So if you write a book based in even St. Louis, people are gonna, if you have something that's wrong or you name a street wrong, people will call you on that, and the reader will just check out. So then you're kind of tied to reality. So it's give and take. I mean, it's a trade-off is what I mean. So I think you need to think through, why do you want to do it this way, and what are you willing to give up for that?
and another diplomatic response. Thank you. So then there's a question came in about um, what happens when we're editing and we figure out we've got to let go of things that don't work. Do you save your old drafts, or do you delete them and just try to forget that they existed?
Right. So I actually use a program, a lot of you might use it too, called Scrivener. I like to write in Scrivener. It's some software you could check out. I use a tiny small fraction of what it's capable. It has a lot of capabilities. I use it kind of like a word processor, but it's got this binder down the side. You can see everything all at once, like all your folders and files and their labels are right in front of you. So you can take scenes and just say, oop, that was scene 8. I'm going to move it to scene 4, and it's real fast. I think I like that over like Word because I can see everything. So what I do is sometimes I'll have a little folder down there like save for later or maybe, you know, or I don't like this. I have weird names for my folders, but sometimes I will just toss it in there and then maybe, you know, write something new. I do tend to save a lot, but Scrivener allows that. So that's one thing I like about it. It's just unlimited amount of space. It's like having junk drawers, but they're right there. You need to have junk drawers on your desktop.
Yeah, and I just grabbed the link to, they usually have a NaNoWriMo deal for Scrivener. So if it's something you're interested in checking out, you can kind of get in on it with, without a huge financial commitment to it. Um, so you have some family giving you a shout out
Oh,
from Kansas City,
yay, hello.
sending you love. All right, okay. Some fresh questions just came in, but we'll get to those in a minute. We'll have got a lot of good things that have come in. Um, so quickly on the short story, there are a couple questions that came in about short stories. One was places to submit, which is a whole other program, and actually I'm working on developing
Cool,
one
cool.
with December Magazine. So,
Yay. Good.
but do you have any quick references where you people could look to find or how they
Yeah,
find their places to submit?
yeah. Some people, I've done that for people, some people who have wanted that service. I've actually helped give them like a list of so many magazines that I think your work would fit here. It is a huge undertaking to get familiar with the literary magazine landscape, and there's no shortcutting it unless you pay somebody to shortcut it for you. So if you're going to do it yourself, I would say one thing I used to do when I used to submit a lot of poetry to places, and I would look at bios of writers I liked, like in literary magazines or in their, you know, collections of poetry, and I would see where they had published, and I started a spreadsheet and I would look at those magazines. It takes a long time. There are hundreds of literary magazines, and so it's not something you can just do really very fast. But if you find someone whose work is kind of like yours, also the literary magazines are very diverse, the kind of writing there. So if you like, hey, I kind of write like this writer, where have they been published? That might be a good starting place for you to say, okay, maybe that place would like my work, and to check it out.
Yeah, great advice. And there was another question that kind of fits in with that. Someone asked about if we publish a short story, is that something we then have access to turn into a novel or use again? So I don't know if you want to talk about first rights real quick.
Yeah, so it's kind of standard that, and they're a little different, but usually a magazine will take first publication rights. So they publish it, and then the rights usually revert back to the writer at some point. Sometimes they'll have a period of time. Like we want it exclusively for 3 months, and then after 3 months, you can take it, do whatever. Because people who want to publish short story collections or poetry collections, it actually helps you to have had those pieces previously published. So if you can rack up some really good publications, and then you want to collect those and try to get those published, it's very helpful that they were already published. So yes, usually you get the rights back. It'll vary, and there'll be a contractual thing with the publication.
I'm thinking of something like Visit from the Goon Squad, and that's basically a novel of short stories, things that can stand alone in some ways. And I think she did publish excerpts of that in literary journals.
Yeah,
So that might be a good
yeah,
reference. So
yeah,
there are ways that even novels can be published as short stories.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. You should get the rights back, and you should check on that when you agree to that publication contract, that should be part of it.
yeah. All right. So that kind of segs us to the more writerly or more businessy sorts of things. So,
Uh-oh.
well, it may be this first one may be more philosophical. Um, NaNoWriMo, where do you fall on some? There are a lot of mixed feelings about cranking out 50,000 words in 30 days. So someone
Yeah.
asked if you had how you what your where
Yeah.
you fall on that.
Yeah. So I've tried it. It doesn't really suit me as a writer, and I just feel more slow and deliberate. So I just couldn't do it. But I've had friends who've had success with it. Now, success doesn't mean that they wrote a great book at the end of that. But sometimes the exercise of doing that much writing in a month can really pay off. First of all, wow, most of us could stand to be able to produce more every time we sit down to write. Okay. So if you're working that muscle, that's going to pay off for you. Like, oh, your writing sessions will become more productive after Nano, just in general. So I love that. I also love that it can give you a chance to really work through an idea a lot. Like day after day after day after day after day, you're going to really have made progress. The idea that you would write a great book, come out and oh, I wrote a book. There's my draft, and it's going to be published. So I think it's one of the I guess it's not really apocryphal stories, but people love to talk about like the Night Circus. That was a Nano book. People are like, "What is a Nano book?" Well, what's her? Is it Morgan Stern who wrote that? Yeah. So she even tweeted out. I saw last year. She goes, "Here's where everybody likes to talk about how I did this in Nano." She says, "I think it was just this terrible draft that she had at first, right?" So she had to really then take that and do a lot with it. So um, I'm all for it. If you're in, like if you're in, you're in. Like I can't deny that writerly energy. Go for it. I couldn't do it, but I think it has benefits.
Yeah, I think managing expectations, yeah, that's going to be really
There you go.
tough to write it's not going to be War and Peace in that first draft.
Yeah, yeah,
So we also had somebody ask about I think about more genre kinds of writing. Do these kinds of tips that you share with us, does that work for writing, let's say YA lit or other kinds of writing other than literary fiction?
yeah. I think it does. I think it does. If you're writing in a genre, there are some extra some concerns. So I say if you're writing a thriller, if you really need, Google high concept novel. So you really need to bring it with the premise. You really got to bring it with the premise if you're writing something in genre horror or something like that. You're not going to fall into the quiet novel probably. So that was a little bit different. Another resource, I think I put this one on my list, but a book I like for genre writers is Storygrid. And I think it's Sean Coyne. I think that Coyne. I don't know. It's on my list. Um, he really gets into genre a lot and genre conventions that people need to be aware of. If you're writing a mystery, these are reader expectations. So you either meet them or don't meet them at your peril. So if you don't meet them, it better be deliberate. You better be doing that for a reason and not just because you didn't really think through the conventions or expectations in genre. So, but I think the things I talked about pretty much do apply to genre. And then there's some other considerations.
Yeah, thank you. Um, and someone's
Oh,
backing you up on Sean
yeah,
Coin.
yeah.
um, so thank you for spelling it out because I was coming up dry, but I'll see what I can find in our catalog here in a second. Okay, so then we also had a couple questions about rights. So when you send work out to editors, are there things you need to be thinking about in terms of protecting your work, the intellectual property of your work?
Okay, so I am not an expert on this, and I am not a copyright attorney. So I'm not going to really give advice, but here's what I do. I don't worry about it. It is I hear sometimes in internet forums, people being worried someone's going to steal my work or something like that. That just almost doesn't happen. But I'm not saying it couldn't. I pretty much think the law is that after you've written it, it is copyrighted. Like you have legal protections if you wrote it. So you don't need, used to people would say, oh, you need to print it out, put it in an envelope, stamp it, and mail it to yourself, and then don't open it. It'll be like time stamped. You really don't have to do that. If it's on your computer and you wrote it, you have evidence that it's your property. So I think you're pretty covered on that. I know, like when I work with clients, I do have a legal contract that has more legal language, and it just protects everybody, and it gets a little more maybe specific about that because I want to put everybody at ease. But mostly you don't need to worry about, I think, protecting your work. But that, you know, I wish we had a copyright attorney here. So I shouldn't say more.
You're very smart for that. I should have put you on the spot because yes, we don't want to get caught out. But it is, I think that is something that people can sit, who aren't used to sending work out. That's something that,
Yeah,
that they're concerned with, and yeah,
sure.
just it's a good thing to keep on everybody's radar that that they're thinking about it. But yeah, things are a lot easier these days, especially with computers having records of our drafts and things like that help too. So okay, so we think about that was similar question. Oh, here's one that slipped past me earlier. What are your thoughts on starting by emulating an author you admire? So you were talking about going to work that you're, um, writers that you like and like seeing how they handle something. Um, how far do we go into that rabbit hole of
Yeah.
of
Well,
emulating?
like, maybe are you getting too copycatty or something like that?
Yeah,
Or
yeah, I think that's maybe
maybe
where we're
worried
going.
about that? Yeah, I would say that isn't a huge worry because this came up so much when I was way back in the day, like learning to write poetry, because we write these little small things and we use so many other poems for models. And a lot of assignments would be try something like this. It's kind of like that's how the old masters would learn to paint. That's how artists do. They apprentice and they copy sometimes. So we don't copy, but we do actually say, what's their approach? What's the sentence structure? Could I write sentences that are structured like this? We do a lot of that. I actually think you will not be able to copy. So here's the thing. You, as much as you try, so your genius will be your inability to copy. You will try to do it and your own flavor and voice is just going to come through and you won't be able to stop it. So you might be learning and borrowing some good ideas, but I don't think you need to worry too much that you're going to feel too copycat because it's kind of actually hard to actually copy somebody.
Yeah, excellent. Um, I think that we're kind of out of, we've gone a little over, but I think we've kind of hit on the kind of the major chords that people were throwing out in the chat.
And if
And
people want to email me, I really would answer a question. If your question didn't get answered, um, you know, Kim@kimlozano.com. I'd be
perfect.
happy to just chat with you.
Yeah, I put that in the chat earlier, and I have Kim's website here, but I'll put that in again. But thank you. Yeah, I think we got I think we laid out the groundwork. I think you did a great job of giving them the tools they need to get started. So if there was a late question to fan fiction, so that is a vein that's very popular and it's making its way into literary fiction. So maybe final thoughts about
Yeah.
fanfic and its
I don't
concept.
have thoughts about it. I've never read it. I know what it is. I get it. I get the concept. I've heard of some of the websites where people share. I've never done it. I've never read any of it. If it's helpful to you, if you get excited, if you feel like you're learning to write and you just love it, I don't discourage any of those writerly activities. Whether there's some path there that's going to get you to your goal, I don't know. Like, it depends on
Mhm.
your goal. So I don't have opinions on fan fiction.
Yeah.
I'm very out of that loop.
Yeah, I think I mostly know about it thanks to Olivia Dade's work. She writes romance novels, and she's been in a series, working on a series where the characters kind of have parallel things going on through the fan fiction they're writing, which has been really interesting. So, so it's out there. And my daughter, well, now I have it. Now having a child like who's obsessed with fandoms, like fan fiction, she's always like writing her OC, it's a whole world that I'm learning about myself. So thank you for taking a stab at it. But we've had a lot of great feedback in the chat as well on thanking you, Kim, for sharing your expertise with us. And I wholeheartedly agree. I put in the chat the virtual sign-in form. So if folks want to let us know what you thought about tonight, that'd be really helpful. And it had Kim's email address as well. But hopefully you can catch up with the recording if you need. If there's anything you missed from tonight, you can always come back to that. And hopefully we'll see you again at another writing program soon. And hopefully I'll have Kim come back and talk to us some more. It's the second time she's done something with us, and they both have been delightful and very informative. So thank you again, Kim.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Sarah.
Wonderful.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.